If you've ever looked at your bank account, your salary, or even your investment portfolio and thought, maybe just a little more, then I'll finally feel secure, you are not alone. In fact, most people spend their entire lives believing happiness is one more raise away, one more investment away, one more financial milestone away. And honestly, that belief feels incredibly reasonable in today's world. Because everywhere we look, someone seems to have more. Someone drives the nicer car. Someone owns the bigger house. Someone retired earlier. Someone is taking vacations you haven't even imagined yet. And little by little, without even realizing it, we begin to move our definition of success further and further away from ourselves. Recently, I started reading the book Good Money by John Coleman. And early in the book, he introduced a concept that completely stopped me in my tracks. He called it the financial finish line. The moment I read those words, I sat there thinking, yes, this is exactly the conversation we need to be having. Because for years now, I've been fascinated by one idea more than almost anything else in personal finance. The idea of enough. Not more, not infinite wealth, not chasing money forever. Enough. And I think that word has become almost revolutionary in modern culture. We live in a society that constantly tells us to scale bigger, hustle harder, earn more, optimize everything, monetize every hobby, and never stop climbing. Somewhere along the way, many of us stopped asking ourselves an incredibly important question. What am I actually trying to build? Not what social media says success should look like, not what your coworkers think, not what impresses strangers online, but your life, your peace, your freedom, your version of happiness. Because if we never define what enough means for us, the truth is we can spend our entire lives running toward a finish line that keeps moving. And that's exhausting. Now, let me be clear before anyone misunderstands me. I'm not against ambition. I'm not against building wealth. I'm not against hard work. I deeply believe in financial responsibility. I believe in investing. I believe in creating opportunities for yourself and your family. I believe in building security and options and freedom. But I also believe there has to come a point where money stops being the entire purpose of your life. Because what scares me is how many people spend decades postponing joy. They postpone rest. They postpone experiences. They postpone relationships. They postpone living. Always saying, I'll enjoy life later. Later when the promotion comes. Later when the mortgage is smaller. Later when the investments hit a certain number. Later when they finally feel financially safe. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to talk about. For many people, later never comes. Because the goalpost keeps moving. And this is exactly what the data shows us. There was a fascinating survey conducted by Empower that asked people a very simple question. How much annual income would you need to feel happy or less stressed? Simple question, but the answers reveal something incredibly important about human psychology. People earning under $25,000 said they'd feel happier around $40,000. People making between $25,000 and $34,000 wanted around $55,000. Those earning between $35,000 and $49,000 thought $65,000 would finally do it. Then the numbers kept climbing. People making $75,000 wanted $110,000. People making over $200,000 said they needed closer to $350,000 to feel happier and less stressed. Now stop for a second and really think about what that means. At almost every income level, the answer was basically the same, just a little more. And honestly, isn't that fascinating? Because if money alone solved the emotional side of security, eventually the chart would flatten. Eventually, people would say, this is enough, I've arrived. But that rarely happens. Instead, the higher the income, the bigger the next target becomes. And I think this is one of the most important realizations anyone can have about money. Financial problems and emotional problems are not always the same thing. Yes, money absolutely matters. Let's not pretend otherwise. If someone is struggling to afford rent, food, healthcare, or childcare, more income can dramatically improve quality of life. Financial stress is real. Survival pressure is real. But once basic needs are covered, something else starts happening. The emotional definition of enough becomes incredibly slippery because human beings adapt very quickly. The apartment that once felt luxurious becomes normal. The salary that once felt unbelievable becomes expected. The lifestyle upgrade becomes your baseline. And suddenly, the thing you once prayed for no longer feels extraordinary. Psychologists actually have a term for this, the hedonic treadmill. And honestly, I think it explains modern life perfectly. The idea is simple. When something improves in your life, your income, your home, your status, your lifestyle, your happiness increases temporarily. But eventually, your emotional baseline resets. Then you begin wanting the next thing. You adapt. And adaptation is both a beautiful and dangerous part of being human. It's beautiful because it helps us survive hardship, but it's dangerous because it makes satisfaction temporary. That's why someone can finally hit $1 million net worth and still feel financially anxious. That's why someone can double their income and still feel behind. That's why some of the wealthiest people in the world remain deeply dissatisfied. Because the issue was never purely numerical, it was emotional. And honestly, I think comparison plays a massive role in this. Most people don't evaluate wealth in isolation. They evaluate it relative to the people around them. If you make $100,000 and everyone around you makes $50,000, you feel successful. If you make $300,000 but everyone around you makes millions, suddenly you feel average. That's how powerful environment is. The moment you enter a new financial circle, your standards shift. Your expectations shift. Your desires shift. Your insecurities shift. And social media has poured gasoline on this problem because now we compare ourselves not just to neighbors or coworkers, but to the entire world. Every scroll shows another luxury vacation, another entrepreneur, another investment success story, another person retiring at 35. And even when we logically know social media isn't real life, emotionally it still affects us. It quietly whispers, you should be doing more. You should have more. You're behind. And that pressure can become endless if we don't intentionally step back and define success for ourselves. One of the most powerful things I've ever realized is this. Every financial decision is also a life decision. We tend to think of money in spreadsheets and numbers and percentages, but money is deeply connected to time, and time is your life. So every time you move the financial goalpost further away, you are also extending the amount of life energy required to reach it. That extra $1 million may cost 5 more working years, 5 more years of stress, 5 more years of alarm clocks, 5 more years of sacrificing time. Now, maybe that trade-off is worth it to you. That's entirely personal. But I think many people never stop to consciously ask themselves that question. They just keep climbing automatically because that's what ambitious people are supposed to do. But eventually, you have to ask, what am I sacrificing in exchange for more? Because there absolutely comes a point where the pursuit of wealth can begin delaying the actual experience of living. And that's a painful realization, especially when you realize there are seasons of life you can never get back. Your children are only young once. Your parents only age once. Your health only has so many good years. Your energy is not infinite. And sometimes I think we underestimate how expensive endless ambition can become emotionally. Again, I am not against success, but I do think there's wisdom in understanding the difference between building a good life and endlessly postponing one. One thing I found incredibly interesting in the book was the discussion around millionaires who still don't feel wealthy. And at first glance, that sounds absurd. How could someone with $1 or $2 or $3 million not feel rich? But when you think about it more deeply, it actually makes complete sense. Many people who become millionaires don't suddenly transform into extravagant spenders overnight. Often they spent decades being disciplined, frugal, intentional, and careful. Their identity was built around modesty and consistency. So when the account balance finally reaches 7 figures, internally, they still feel like the same person they were before. Because wealth is not just mathematical, it's psychological. And I think this is something people misunderstand constantly. There's a huge difference between having money and feeling secure. There's a huge difference between looking wealthy and feeling wealthy. And perhaps most importantly, there's a huge difference between wealth and peace. I've met people with modest incomes who radiate peace. And I've met financially successful people who are constantly anxious. Because peace doesn't automatically appear at a certain net worth. Peace often comes from clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what you value. Clarity about what kind of life you actually want. And this brings me back to the idea of the financial finish line. I think one of the most empowering things a person can do is define their version of enough before they get there. Not after, before. Because if you wait until after you've accumulated wealth, there's a good chance your desires will keep expanding. That's human nature. But if you decide in advance, this is the lifestyle I want, this is the amount that supports my peace, this is the level where I already have more than enough, something powerful happens. You stop living entirely in pursuit mode. You start living more intentionally. And no, this doesn't mean you stop growing or contributing or creating. It simply means your life is no longer controlled by endless financial escalation. I remember reading about a wealthy individual who decided that once he reached a certain financial milestone, everything beyond that amount would be given away to causes he cared about. Charities, family, community projects. And honestly, I found that idea deeply inspiring. Not because everyone should cap their wealth, that's not the point. The point is that he had clarity. He knew what enough looked like for him. And once he reached it, he no longer needed money to prove anything. That level of self-awareness is rare because many people spend their lives chasing numbers without ever asking why those numbers matter to them in the first place. Sometimes the desire for more is actually fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of losing status, fear of feeling insignificant, fear of not being enough ourselves. And that's why financial conversations are never just financial. They're emotional, they're psychological, they're deeply human. I think one of the saddest traps in modern life is believing your worth as a human being rises and falls entirely with your productivity or your income. Because if that becomes your identity, then rest feels guilty. Slowing down feels lazy. Contentment feels like failure. And you become trapped in a cycle where no achievement ever truly satisfies you for long. That's not freedom. That's emotional exhaustion wearing expensive clothes. Real freedom, in my opinion, is being able to say, I already have enough. Not because you stop dreaming, but because your peace no longer depends on endlessly chasing more. There's such incredible power in contentment. And I know contentment is not a flashy word. It doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't sell luxury courses. It doesn't sound aggressive or impressive. But contentment might actually be one of the highest forms of wealth. Because contentment allows you to enjoy your life while you are living it. Not 20 years later, now. And honestly, I think we need more conversations about enjoying money responsibly instead of only glorifying accumulation. Save for the future, yes. Invest consistently, yes. Build security, absolutely. But also go on the trip sometimes. Take your parents to dinner. Spend time with people you love. Create memories. Rest. Because money is a tool, and tools are meant to improve life, not consume it. One day, nobody is going to stand at your funeral and say, you know what really mattered? That extra 8% portfolio growth. What they'll remember is who you were, how you loved people, how present you were, how much joy you brought into the room. And I think somewhere deep down, most of us already know this. But modern culture is incredibly loud. It constantly pushes us toward more consumption, more status, more comparison, more proving. So sometimes we need to intentionally pause and ask ourselves questions like, what lifestyle genuinely makes me happy? How much is enough for my version of life? What trade-offs am I willing to make? And perhaps most importantly, am I building wealth in service of my life, or am I sacrificing my life in service of wealth? That question changes everything. Because financial success without emotional fulfillment can become surprisingly empty. And again, I'm not saying ambition is bad. Some people genuinely love building businesses, investing, creating, achieving, and growing indefinitely. That's wonderful. But the danger is when ambition becomes automatic rather than intentional. When you no longer know why you're chasing the next milestone. When more becomes a reflex instead of a conscious choice. That's why I think defining your financial finish line is so important. Even if the number changes over time, even if your goals evolve, at least you're making deliberate decisions instead of unconsciously drifting into endless pursuit. And honestly, I think this conversation matters now more than ever because financial anxiety is everywhere. People feel behind. Young adults feel hopeless about housing. Parents feel pressure to provide perfectly. Workers feel burned out. Retirees fear outliving savings. And while building wealth matters, emotional clarity matters too, because no amount of money can fully solve a life built around constant comparison. At some point, you have to decide what success means for you, not your friends, not influencers, not society, you. Maybe your version of success is a modest home and flexible time. Maybe it's retiring early. Maybe it's traveling the world. Maybe it's building a huge company. Maybe it's having enough freedom to never miss your child's soccer game. There is no universally correct answer, but there is incredible power in consciously defining your own answer. And I truly believe people become much happier when they stop trying to win a game they never personally chose. Because if you don't define enough, society will define it for you. And society's definition is infinite. More money, more status, more upgrades, more everything, forever. That game never ends. Which means if you're waiting for external validation to finally feel secure, there's a good chance you'll wait forever. But when you internally define your own finish line, that changes things. Suddenly, money becomes less emotional. You stop needing every purchase to impress people. You stop measuring your worth entirely through income. You stop feeling like you're constantly behind. And perhaps most importantly, you give yourself permission to enjoy the life you already built. That's huge, because so many people are standing in lives they once dreamed about, and they're too distracted chasing the next thing to even notice it. Think about that for a second. There was probably a younger version of you who would be amazed by parts of your life right now. The salary, the home, the opportunities, the wisdom, the resilience. But adaptation makes us forget. We normalize our blessings incredibly quickly. That's why gratitude matters so much financially. Gratitude interrupts the endless appetite for more. It reminds us that enough is not always a number. Sometimes enough is perspective. And I think the people who truly experience financial peace are not necessarily the people with the highest incomes. They are often the people who learned how to align their money with their values. People who understand that wealth is not only about accumulation, it's also about freedom, flexibility, security, time, relationships, peace of mind. And honestly, peace of mind might be one of the most undervalued forms of wealth in the entire world. Because what's the point of building an extraordinary financial life if you're too stressed, anxious, or exhausted to enjoy it? At some point, the entire purpose of money should be to support your life, not replace it. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that ambition is wrong, not that wealth is bad, but that the pursuit of more should never cost you the ability to appreciate what you already have. So perhaps the real question is not, how much money do I need? Maybe the deeper question is, what kind of life am I actually trying to create? Because once you answer that honestly, your financial decisions become much clearer. You stop chasing random numbers. You start building intentionally. And maybe, just maybe, you finally allow yourself to believe that enough is possible.